that this little girl, like, you were the youngest. What do you feel your parents were expecting you to become?
Like all parents, they want their children to be happy.
Are you happy?
I am happy in the sense that I have many things to be grateful for. But if I have a wish for myself, it's to be able to achieve something.
What you're about to hear was never meant to be soft or forgiving. For a long time, the world convinced itself the chapter was closed. The faces had been identified. The courtrooms had gone quiet. The news cycle moved on to something easier to digest. But silence has never been proof that the truth is gone. More often, it means the truth is being restrained, waiting patiently for immunity to expire. From behind prison walls, Ghislaine Maxwell no longer has power structures to shield her, legacies to defend, or leverage left to bargain with. According to multiple source accounts, she has started talking, not recklessly, not in public view, but with calculated intent. And among the names circling back into the conversation is one many believed existed beyond reach. Meghan Markle, not framed by crowns or titles, but referenced as someone from a much earlier phase. A period before global attention, before palace protocols, before curated narratives, when proximity carried more value than popularity, and when photographs were captured without understanding how explosive they would later become. Images thought to be buried are surfacing again. Connections once waved away are being scrutinized with fresh eyes. Details previously scrubbed from timelines are quietly slipping back into the official record. This is not a tale built on rumor. It is a reckoning with what resisted erasure. Every major scandal reaches a point where control slips away, not through a press release, but through exposure. And according to renewed source claims, a cache of photographs once deliberately suppressed has now found its way back into the light. These images are being labeled troubling, not because of what they show on the surface, but because of who appears within them, where they were captured, and who else is now known to have occupied those same spaces. For years, these photographs were reportedly wiped clean, stripped from databases, pulled from archives, rendered impossible to source or license, and yet somehow, they have resurfaced. Sources say the explanation is painfully straightforward. Too many individuals were involved. Too many intersecting relationships. Too many witnesses to keep synchronized forever. Eventually, preserving silence carries more risk than allowing evidence to resurface. What makes these images unsettling isn't simply that they exist. It's the extraordinary effort that went into making sure they didn't. Institutions don't erase material without cause. Media libraries don't quietly lock content away unless someone has decided visibility is dangerous. And now, that calculation has collapsed. The photographs situate Meghan Markle inside a social ecosystem long linked to Jeffrey Epstein, a world defined less by a single place and more by a web of elite gatherings, discreet travel, and carefully guarded access. This is where the narrative begins to shift, away from speculation and toward documentation. On their own, photographs appear harmless. A room, a face, a frozen second in time. But context transforms everything. According to source accounts, these images are considered damaging because they establish presence, not rumor, not coincidence, but physical proximity within a documented social circle. They lock in a timeline. They connect individuals once separated by plausible deniability. And perhaps most critically, they explain the prolonged silence. When images disappear, it's rarely about avoiding embarrassment. It's about exposure. It's about what those images might compel others to recall, corroborate, or finally admit. Sources claim that whenever these materials threatened to surface, efforts were made to minimize them, distract from them, or redirect the narrative entirely. The approach wasn't denial. It was fatigue. Let interest die. Let curiosity burn out. Let the images stay unseen long enough to lose relevance. But time alters power. When protection weakens, when alliances splinter, when silence no longer serves those invested in it, the truth doesn't need to be argued. It only needs to be shown. That is why these images carry weight. Not because they accuse, but because they place. And placement is the cornerstone of every serious investigation. To understand how this unfolded, you have to understand invisibility. Before Meghan Markle became a global figure, she was something far more strategic. Unnoticed. According to sources, during the years in question, she moved through elite environments without scrutiny precisely because no one was paying attention. She wasn't famous enough to draw interest, influential enough to provoke questions, or significant enough to be monitored. And that lack of visibility was an asset. At private events, curated openings, and invitation-only gatherings, unfamiliar faces fade into the background. Names go unrecorded. Origins go unchallenged. No one asks who arranged the invitation, how the travel was funded, or who facilitated the access. Sources allege that during this period, Meghan Markle appeared in rooms where proximity mattered more than prestige, where introductions were whispered and entry was informal. In those spaces, anonymity functioned as protection. It explains why her presence left so little trace at the time, why photographs weren't tagged, why identities weren't logged. Only later, after marriage, after elevation, after global scrutiny, did the past begin to carry consequences. Because invisibility protects you only until it doesn't. And once a crown enters the picture, every unrecorded step before it becomes part of the archive, whether it was meant to be there or not. If anonymity was the shield, then access required a passageway. According to source claims, one of the most reliable conduits into elite circles during that era was Soho House, a private members network designed to appear creative, relaxed, and inconsequential while quietly linking powerful figures behind closed doors. In 2015, Meghan Markle is alleged to have been flown to Istanbul for the launch of a Soho House location. At the time, she was not a household name. She was not the main attraction. She was described as a social filler, someone present to populate rooms, attend events, and maintain atmosphere. But these gatherings weren't random. Soho House openings were magnets for financiers, royalty-adjacent figures, Hollywood power brokers, and individuals who valued discretion above publicity. Invitations were currency. Presence implied access. What raised quiet questions later, sources allege, was the scale of travel, international flights, premium seating, a level of mobility that appeared inconsistent with her acting income at the time. According to claims, even colleagues from her television work privately questioned how such travel was being funded. No answers were offered publicly. None were required then. Because in that corridor, no one asks how you arrived, only whether you belong. To understand the concerns surrounding the resurfaced images, it's necessary to understand what sources describe as the Epstein environment. This was not a single house, island, or city. It was a social ecosystem. According to source claims, Meghan Markle was repeatedly present in New York during periods when Prince Andrew was also in the city. Times when Jeffrey Epstein's social calendar was active and well attended by a consistent circle of figures. The significance here is not a single meeting. It is repetition. Being in the same environment once can be coincidence. Being present across multiple overlaps suggests familiarity, comfort, acceptance. Sources alleged that during this time, she moved easily within rooms where introductions were informal and discretion was expected. These were not spaces governed by sign-in sheets or press coverage. They were governed by silence. This is why proximity matters. Not because it proves wrongdoing, but because it establishes who had the opportunity to see, hear, and know. And in environments later exposed as abusive, opportunity becomes a serious factor. The resurfacing of images matters because they confirm that proximity was not theoretical. It was physical. At this point, the story widens. Not to distract, but to clarify. According to newly revisited source claims, Meghan Markle's alleged trajectory is not unique. Other women across Europe followed strikingly similar paths. Early modeling or party circuits, proximity to elite social figures, and eventual marriage into royalty. Two cases are frequently cited. Sophia of Sweden, whose past association sources allege link back to Epstein-connected social environments as early as 2005. She later married into royalty, at which point those early years faded quietly from public conversation, and met Marie of Norway, who publicly apologized in 2019 for having maintained a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, citing poor judgment. Her past included controversial relationships and associations that were downplayed once she entered royal life. The importance of these cases is not moral judgment. It is pattern recognition. According to source claims, Epstein did not operate chaotically. He moved people strategically. He placed individuals into environments where upward mobility was possible and where past could be quietly absorbed by institutions once status was achieved. In this light, the resurfaced images are no longer isolated. They become part of a broader framework, one where anonymity, access, and advancement intersect. And once that pattern becomes visible, it becomes impossible to unsee. By the time the story reaches this point, the timeline becomes impossible to ignore. According to source claims, February 2016 stands out for one reason. It appears in two very different narratives that are not supposed to intersect. On one hand, this is the period when Meghan Markle later stated she first met Prince Harry. On the other, sources allege this same window aligns with what were known as Yacht Weeks, private invitation-only excursions involving wealthy patrons, models, and social companions. These events were not cruises in the traditional sense. They were floating social spaces designed for privacy, discretion, and selective access. Phones were discouraged. Press was absent. Names rarely appeared in records. Sources claim Meghan Markle participated in one such yacht week during this exact period. The significance here is not accusation. It is overlap. When two origin stories share the same window, one public, one private, questions naturally arise. Not because anyone insists on an answer, but because timelines do not bend easily once established. And in stories involving power, timing is often the loudest detail of all. Until now, the story has lived in social space. Here it enters legal territory. According to court-related source claims, Virginia Gay, one of the most prominent accusers in the Jeffrey Epstein case, intended to call Meghan Markle as a potential witness in her civil case involving Prince Andrew. This was not a symbolic gesture. 3 reasons were cited. First, Meghan Markle resided in the United States, making jurisdiction possible. Second, she was described as having been a close associate of Prince Andrew for a period of time. And third, most critically, she was said to have been present within Jeffrey Epstein's social environment. In legal terms, presence matters not because it assigns guilt, but because it establishes who may have seen, heard, or understood what was happening behind closed doors. Witnesses are not accused, they are positioned. Ultimately, she was not called to testify. But the fact that her name entered that legal consideration at all changed the nature of the conversation. At that moment, the story shifted from social curiosity to judicial relevance. Silence can last years. It rarely lasts forever. According to source claims, as legal consequences solidified and prison doors closed, Ghislaine Maxwell began to speak more openly, not in press conferences, but in statements that suggested cooperation, exposure, and resentment toward those who walked free. Her alleged claims reached back into Hollywood, modeling circuits, and elite social placement, including references to Meghan Markle's past associations. At the same time, something else began to happen quietly. Image archives changed. Photographs vanished. Licensing restrictions appeared without explanation. Getty Images, according to claims, removed or limited access to certain photographs involving Meghan Markle. Images that were previously available. No public reason was given to observers. It appeared as if institutions were attempting to erase visual records before they could be re-examined under a new lens. But erasure itself draws attention because when systems move to hide material rather than address it, they confirm one thing: the material still matters. And by this point, too many people knew what had existed to pretend it never did. For years, the story remained intact because it was curated. Images were scrubbed. Names were detached. Timelines were simplified. What couldn't be denied was buried under what couldn't be proven until the moment protection faded. What this story reveals is not a single scandal, but a process. A method by which obscurity becomes access. Access becomes elevation, and elevation attempts to rewrite the past. But records do not forget. Photographs wait. Witnesses remember. And silence only works until someone decides it no longer serves them. The resurfacing of these images does not close the story. It reopens it. Not with shouting, not with spectacle, but with something far more dangerous to powerful systems: context. Because once context returns, the narrative can no longer be controlled. And what was once invisible becomes unavoidable. This is not the end. It is the moment the record stopped being editable.